Hey everybody, Idre here, and welcome to the first installment of this new series I'm going to be doing on this channel, where I cover 10 classic albums that I enjoy quite a bit. Now keep in mind, to me, classic is anything that isn't brand new, so that could be anything from 100 years ago to last year. Now, I'm going to make one thing clear, and I really want to stress this point, and I want everybody watching to pay attention to what I'm about to say. I am not a music encyclopedia. A lot of people hold music reviewers to such high regard as if they know everything about music. I don't know everything about music. That shouldn't be a shocker. But I want to bring this up because even though I have listened to hundreds of albums, probably even 1,000, maybe, I don't know. I don't really keep track of every single album I listen to. And even though these albums that I've listened to span all decades, I am the most familiar with this year and the past few years. Because it hasn't been until this year I started focusing heavily on new albums coming out on Friday for my music reviews. It wasn't until this year I started doing that. And it really wasn't until the past few years I started paying attention to, music coming out all the time. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean I'm uneducated on all things old music. In fact, I love a lot of old music. Some of my favorite albums are older. But I simply just don't know nearly as much as I wish I did. And this series is sort of to help me learn more about older music and expand my music palette, expand my knowledge on past albums, etc. So I don't want you guys to change your opinion of me. But for example, I've listened to already like 60 something albums from 2020. That's the most of any year I've ever listened to. There are many years where I only know 1 or 2 albums. There are many years where I know maybe 10 albums. And especially the further back you get with the 70s, 60s, and 50s, the number dwindles. And I know a few albums per year, and that's about it. And I'm planning on changing that. But my final thing is that this is my hobby. This is my hobby. This is not my career. This is not my profession. I am not a professional. So, my whole life is not dedicated to this. This is a thing that I do on the side because it's fun and I like it. So, with all that in mind, I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. And I want some of you in the comments to put albums down below, older albums preferably, for me to check out. And I might cover it in a video, I might not. But, it can be hard expanding your taste when it comes down to old albums when you're focusing on new albums coming out all the time. But I just want to thank everybody for subscribing and keeping me going, as well as listening to what I just said, because I'm not a music encyclopedia. This is just my hobby. There are certain eras of music, like some of the 50s stuff, some of the early 60s and 70s stuff, I'm just simply not that familiar with. And I apologize ahead of time, but let's get into this video. 10 albums, 10 classic albums I really enjoyed quite a bit that I recommend everybody listen to. The first album I will be covering is from 1968, and that is Small Faces' Ogden's Nut Gone Flake. Now, Small Faces, great mod band. I love the mod movement, and I think Small Faces was one of the frontrunners and one of the pioneers of this sound. One of the best ones as well. Some of their early work before this album came out was very straightforward mod material, and while I love that, I think All or Nothing and stuff such as that are great tracks, and overall the albums are pretty solid. It wasn't until Ogden's Nut Gone Flake that they really, went out of their comfort zone. They really definitely took it to the next level. They got a bit more psychedelic. They started messing a lot more with stereo production, which is something I love about the late 60s. I love the stereo production that they were messing around with and experimenting with back then. Overall, I think this was the album in which Small Faces really went to the next level and became the band that they had always strived to be. Now, obviously, it wouldn't be long after that they would kind of break up and turn into Faces with Rod Stewart, and then obviously the rest is history. But I think Small Faces has a charm to them that I personally love quite a bit. And Ogden's Nut Gone Flake, one of the best psychedelic albums and mod albums out there, in my opinion, from 1968. I recommend everybody check that out. The second album I will be covering in this video is by Santana, Abraxas, from 1970. In all honesty, just like I was saying earlier in this video, I never really dived too deep into his material until recently. And what really sticks out to me about Abraxas and Santana's sound in general is I love the way he incorporates more Latin sounds into his music. Obviously, that's because of his heritage, but you don't hear that nearly as much from this era of classic rock. And he is a great guitar player who plays purely with feel, some great feel, great groove, and well, he is technically a good player. He's not overly technical. You know, songs like Black Magic Woman have some of the most recognizable guitar riffs. Songs like Oye Como Va have some great guitar riffs. And overall, the other thing, the musicianship on these albums is so tight. I mean, we are talking about the conga players, from the conga player to the bass to the guitar to the drums. Everything is great. Abraxas has increasingly become one of my favorite albums from that era of music. Santana has increasingly become one of my favorite artists and groups overall. So I definitely recommend everybody check out Abraxas by Santana from 1970. Great classic album. The next album I will be covering, the third one in this video, is Pink Floyd Animals. I can't remember if I've really touched upon Pink Floyd too much, but I did go through a pretty strong Pink Floyd era where I sat down and listened to all their albums. I really enjoy most of them. But if one album stuck out to me the most, it would be Animals, as probably my personal favorite from 1977. In a time when the music scene was changing, when punk was taking off and disco was dominating the charts, bands like Pink Floyd, they were the kind of up in the air. You know, because that era of this type of music was kind of fading out, at least amongst the youth. And yet Pink Floyd managed to drop probably their best album in 1977. Whereas The Wall touches upon a very story-based story, it's this weird sentence, that is very conceptual. Animals is also very conceptual. It's very social too. Mainly Roger Waters written. Animals is a very political, very social album, and it's so well executed that it holds up perfectly today. With only a handful of songs on there, because most of them are so long, songs like Pigs, 3 different ones, is probably one of my favorite Pink Floyd tracks. Overall, to me, Animals is an excellent album, and I wish it got a bit more attention. It's often ranked more towards the bottom of their 70s releases, which is beyond me. I think it's one of their most solid releases, and I love it. The fourth album I will be covering in this video is from Yellow Magic Orchestra, Solid State Survivor from, I believe, 1979. This album is way ahead of its time, containing one of my favorite electronic songs ever, Behind the Mask. Yellow Magic Orchestra sounds like this could have come out in the late 80s, if not later. And yet, it is one of the best and earliest examples of solid synth pop out there. Oftentimes forgotten, because the likes of Kraftwerk get a lot more attention. Yellow Magic Orchestra, to me, is one of those best early electronic bands out there that I wish got a lot more attention. I just wish they were as big as a band like Kraftwerk, because if they were, I feel like they would be getting all the attention in the world. But everybody check out Solid State Survivor. It kind of just was like the precursor to almost everything the 80s would give, and really shaped electronic music and synth pop as a whole. Overall, and some great songs. Like I said, Behind the Mask is one of the best electronic songs ever recorded. And so yeah, Yellow Magic Orchestra, Solid State Survivor from 1979. Check that album out. The fifth album I'm going to be talking about is one of my favorite albums of all time, Bauhaus, In the Flat Field from 1980. I love Bauhaus. I love Peter Murphy as well. And Bauhaus single-handedly kind of inspired a generation of goth artists, post-punk artists, whatever you want to call it. But In the Flat Field is a near-flawless album. It is such a raw, gritty album while being so dark and atmospheric at the same time. It's something I love about it. Very few bands from that era were able to get both of that down. And between Peter Murphy's just heart-wrenchingly powerful, deep baritone vocals to the sporadic and insane guitar work, it's an excellent album. And honestly, if you haven't heard it, you're missing out. Bauhaus, to me, is the best goth band out there. I think they were the main front runners of the genre in the early days. And everybody check out In the Flat Field by Bauhaus. Excellent album. I don't have enough compliments for it. And the next album is actually down the same vein. The sixth album I'm going to be covering is The Cure's second LP, 17 Seconds from 1980. Going off of that goth thing, The Cure kind of had a different approach. They were never outright necessarily a goth band, but they definitely were they were definitely inspired and inspired many others. And 17 Seconds, to me, is one of their best albums. And the main thing that sticks out to me about 17 Seconds is its minimalist production. It's very, very, very minimal. There isn't too much grandness going on. It's essentially just some clean guitar tones, some very small-sounding drums that kind of sound like a drum machine, even though I know it's a drummer. And, it's very much to the point. And when you compare it to Three Imaginary Boys just 1 year prior, it's such a huge step in the right direction. Between A Forest, Play for Today, so many great songs, In Your House, excellent tracks, excellent spooky tracks as well. Overall, a very dark and gothy album, but despite being very minimalist, keeping an excellent atmosphere that very few albums can match. So yeah, The Cure, 17 Seconds from 1980, I recommend everybody check out. The seventh album I'm going to be covering in this video is from none other than Nitzer Ebb, a band that I don't think I've really talked too much about on this channel, and it is That Total Age from 1987. Opening up for Depeche Mode time and time again is an honor. It's an honor. I love these guys. And it makes perfect sense why Nitzer Ebb would open up for a band like Depeche Mode. That Total Age of IDM, very industrial dance music, was just so aggressive, especially for the time. It's nice hearing an electronic band from that era get so aggressive, because a lot of the things you were hearing aggressively were from the metal scene or from the underground punk scene. So it's nice to hear Nitzer Ebb really go insane. With some great industrial beats, some great sound synthscapes throughout the entire album, some really harsh, brutal, screaming vocals throughout the entire project as well, joining the chant, one of the best chants out there. Overall, That Total Age is a massively underrated, massively overlooked album. Some great electronic dance music, some great industrial, heavy-hitting, crazy shit. It's an awesome album. Definitely recommend everybody check out Nitzer Ebb. I think Nitzer Ebb, in general, needs much more appreciation. Let Your Body Learn, Murderous, Join in the Chant. All great industrial bangers. Very intense. Very high energy. But very well executed. I love That Total Age by Nitzer Ebb from 1987. Speaking of aggression, the eighth album I'm going to be talking about on this video is Bad Religion's 1992 album, Generator. Bad Religion, to me, has always been one of the best punk bands out there, with a pretty consistent sound for the most part. There's very few stuff in their discography that I think is genuinely bad. But if there's one album I had to pick as being the highlight, it's Generator from 1992. As usual, it's a very socially and politically heated album. That should be expected by them. That's their whole gist at this point. But there's something about the production and the musicianship on Generator that really makes it stand out from even albums like Suffer and Against the Grain, which are undeniably great classic punk albums. Between the opening track, Generator, to the closing track, which I believe is Only Entertainment, it's a really solid album with some really deep and insightful lyrics, some good slower songs in the mix as well, and some of the best punk musicianship I have ever heard. Between the solid drumming and excellent guitar playing, some of the best guitar playing you've ever seen, some tremendous guitar playing on that album. Great solos that you don't usually hear too often in punk music. Overall, I think Bad Religion really was at the top of their game in the early 90s with albums like Against the Grain and the mentioned Generator from 1992, which is probably my favorite one of theirs. Great punk album, especially if you're into that 90s punk sound. That's always been my personal favorite era of punk music, and I could have put like 10 other punk albums on this list, but I'm limiting it to 10. Albums from Rancid, from Operation Ivy, from Pennywise. So many great punk bands from the late 80s and early 90s, from the East Bay, from California. Overall, Bad Religion really did hit it out of the park with Generator. Definitely encapsulates that political era as well as that musical era. Great album. The ninth album I'm going to be covering in this video is from none other than Marilyn Manson, an artist that I've recently been really getting into. Antichrist Superstar from 1996. You literally can't go wrong with this album. Not only is the controversy surrounding this album kind of entertaining looking back, the album itself is just a nearly flawless album for Marilyn Manson. It's just so full of edge and anger, but it's so well executed. You know, you have the opening track, Irresponsible Hate Anthem, and it's just so in your face, right off the bat. My personal favorite track on here is Tourniquet. I think it's a great alternative tune, while also still having that gothy sound as well, while that very horror vibe from Marilyn Manson maintains from the first album. And while, yeah, songs like Beautiful People are the most well-known, there's very few negative tracks on this entire album, and I gotta say, this is the closest Marilyn Manson had ever gotten to making a perfect album, though Mechanical Animals and Hollywood are pretty close. Antichrist Superstar is a phenomenal album that I literally just can't get enough of. And honestly, some great production too. I believe Trent Reznor had some input in the production of that album. And to me, Marilyn Manson was at the peak here between his stage presence, between his musicianship. His vocals were on point on this album. Warm Boy is a great song as well. There's so many great songs on this album. I love it. It encapsulates that industrial metal horrorness that Marilyn Manson was going for, and all the controversy surrounding this album and Marilyn Manson as a whole just make this album even better. And the 10th and final album I will be talking about in this video is from Keane, Under the Iron Sea from 2006. Keane, it's very annoying how often they get pushed aside as being a Coldplay knockoff, or the Radiohead fans try to say they're a Radiohead knockoff. To me, Keane was one of the most intriguing bands to come out of that era of British kind of more pop rock. And Under the Iron Sea is a phenomenal album front to finish. Not only is it produced perfectly, the writing on there is so deep and emotional, and so it just really grabs your attention from the first track. And the overall composition of the album, you know, it has a very Britpoppy throwback type feel in many spots while still feeling fresh and innovative. Songs like Atlantic, Crystal Ball, you know, the song The Iron Sea. So there's just so many great tracks on this album. Bad Dream. And while there is a lot of darker, more somber moments, Keane does know when to really ramp it up and have some fun. And this album is everything you want from a Keane album, everything you want from an album in 2006. I love Under the Iron Sea. It also has some great album art while I'm at it. So yeah, Keane, Under the Iron Sea, great album as well. So those are the 10 albums from Small Faces, Santana, Pink Floyd, Yellow Magic Orchestra, Bauhaus, The Cure, Nitzer Ebb, Bad Religion, Marilyn Manson, and Keane that I thought would be a good starting point for this series of all classic albums that I love quite a bit. Now, back to that original point in the video, I am not a music encyclopedia. This is just my hobby. I never get around to listening to nearly as much as I want to listen to. So if anybody watching this has some classic albums that I, want me to listen to and I haven't heard before, put it in the comments. I'm serious. I want to expand my taste as much as I can while still keeping up with all the new music coming out every week. That is it for now. Thank you guys all for watching this. I really enjoy doing this, and that is it, and goodbye.